Our next speaker, also invited and from the Department of Agriculture, Mr. John Mounsey. He is going to talk about the carbon farming, and we are also very much interested in because we want to go for the carbon footprinting and the environmental protective years.
Thanks, Ibrahim. So I'll just check whether page down. Oh, good, lovely. Thanks very much, Ibrahim. Hello, everyone, and tuning in remotely. So thanks for having us. The department is, I suppose, delighted to be involved, collaborating with yourselves. And I suppose it's something that within the Department of Agriculture, the Minister, McConalogue, has taken a deep interest in the idea of developing carbon farming in general for Ireland, you know, as a means of diversifying incomes for farmers in these changing times. And and a lot of it's linked to the need to accelerate the, you know, meeting our targets in agriculture. We've a challenging 25% reduction target by 2030. Most countries don't have such a specific target. And we see carbon farming as a means of helping with other measures to meet that target. And again, the work of methodologies will be important. They'll take a while to develop. So technologies, innovators like in HOLOS will be important in delivering what we're hoping to achieve. So I'll just quickly talk about what is carbon farming, its relevance in Ireland, a bit about the policy in the EU and Ireland, and where we're at and next steps in developing a framework for Ireland. So just a commission definition of what is carbon farming. So it's defined in general terms as a green business model that rewards land managers for taking up improved land management practices, resulting in an increase of carbon sequestration, living biomass, dead organic matter, and soils by enhancing carbon capture and or reducing the release of carbon into the atmosphere in respect of ecological principles. So let's just get that out of the way. And again, from the Commission, just a schematic that kind of gives you a handle on carbon farming, the benefits, you know, in specific terms, you'd like to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Again, additional income potential for land managers, a diversified income. We've seen in some of the years recently challenges, but diversifying the risk, de-risking agriculture is an important element of carbon farming potential. And again, like talking to people earlier, the reality is biodiversity and nature are more important than even some of the measures like carbon. You know, if you have nature, if you have biodiversity, you'll have carbon sequestration, you'll have the co-benefits, soil health, etc., water quality. And very importantly, we've had such a tough winter. You know, there's potential in carbon farming to help increasing climate resilience in farms and forestry land. So for, you know, potential for climate adaptation, you know, more shelter for animals, difficult conditions and, you know, away from the sun. Sometimes they can have the potential to lessen the risk of flooding and maybe lessening the leaching of nutrients into the water courses, etc. So there's huge potential there. But there are many challenges trying to get it up and running. You know, trying to get, again, linked to HOLOS, the challenge of having good MRV, which would be measuring or monitoring, reporting and verification capability, trying to have a cost effective. So there's a move to have looking towards things like using technology such as digital earth observation to facilitate this, and also ground truthing, measuring, for example, soil, carbon, and also be it in biodiversity and such, the use of potentially biodiversity scorecards and the like could come into it. A big challenge will be developing advisory services to support the change. You know, so there's a lot of needing of upskilling, a need for a lot more ecologists out there, hydrologists for the restoration of land. So that'll take time. And the financing, the big question is who's going to pay for this? So the reality is it's likely going to need a good bit of public funding to get it up and running, but it will also need private funding to make it happen. And then there's question marks about how will this operate? You might hear a lot about offsetting where credits are traded, and that could be outside of the value chain, but a lot of people are looking to inset it within the value chains. And so that's all to be teased out. Just a look in Europe, a lot of what we're doing is on the back of European regulations. And there's one which was drafted in November 2022, the Carbon Removal and Certification Framework. And that's nearing completion. That should come out in a few months. And this is basically developing a voluntary market for the likes of carbon removals. And within it, the current definition of carbon farming in Article 2.1H, carbon farming means a practice or process carried out over an activity period of at least 5 years related to terrestrial or coastal management. So they've incorporated a bit of coast, which is important, and resulting in capture and temporary storage of atmospheric and biogenic carbon into biogenic carbon pools. And also they broadened the scope of the regulation to include reduction of soil emissions. So that's important. If we can reduce the likes of more extensively managing peat soils, that could be recognized in this. This regulation has different units. It has permanent carbon removals, things like where if you carbon capture from the air, or biological or BECCS, I can't think of the detail, the acronym at the moment, but things that could take carbon out for hundreds or thousands of years, that might be called permanent. Also temporary carbon storage and long-lasting products, important for us in terms of wood-based products that could go into housing and the like, and they must be for 35 years or more. There's potential for credits there. And on the carbon farming side, there's temporary carbon storage. So this could be in restoring forests and soil, wetland management, seagrass meadows, and again, soil emission reductions. So for the likes of soil management, wetland management, potential around no-till agriculture and using cover crops, and the reduced use of fertilizer. So the likes of these things would need to be certified for a minimum of 5 years. And at the moment, the Commission is looking, there's a kind of a review clause to potentially in 2 years' time, look into the potential for broadening the scope to enteric fermentation and manure management. So there's a possibility that the emissions from the likes of cows could be factored in, the methane, there may be potential there, but that'll be reviewed in 2 years' time. On sustainability, there's a stipulation in the regulation that a carbon farming activity must always generate at least a biodiversity co-benefit, including soil health and avoiding of land degradation, and trying to avoid land grabbing, which a lot of people have worries about. And again, you know, the different units created may have different values, but the important thing, they can only be used for the EU's climate objectives and nationally determined contributions. And we don't want them leaving the area, basically. So in general, methodologies are going to take a bit longer. The regulation will likely come out in a few months' time, but there's a plan that the methodologies will be developed in the coming years. And I suppose that's potential for some of your technologies, which will be based on quality criteria, quantification, additionality, long-term storage, and sustainability. And there's a plan in Europe to develop a common and transparent electronic EU Union registry in about 4 years' time. So credits can potentially be retired or potentially traded from there. So the pace of movement on this, the reality is it could be the guts of 2030 before this gets up and running. And, you know, we're trying to move potentially a little bit quicker in Ireland. And so from our perspective, where does this fit in our agricultural policy? So, you know, I suppose Ireland, we've legally binding commitments under the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act of 2021 to be climate neutral by 2050. And agriculture last year, or was it the year before? I think the year before, 38% of emissions, total emissions, were from agriculture. So it's an important area. It's hard to abate emissions, and it's important we tackle it. So a target was set to reduce agricultural emissions by 25% by 2030 compared to a base year of 2018. And it's good to see the last couple of years, the indications are it is going down. So we're on the right trajectory, but maybe the pace isn't quite fast enough. So as part of Ireland's commitment under its National Climate Action Plan, there is a commitment for us to develop a framework, or at least a draft framework, in Q2 of this year. So within the next couple of months, we're hoping to have a draft version of the framework. In an Irish context, again, we kind of generalize it to carbon farming supporting greenhouse gas removals, again, activities like managing soils, reduced tillage, or reduced ploughing, use of cover crops, and again, measures such as land use activities of great importance, forestry, agroforestry, particular interest to this project, peatland rehabilitation, and again, hedgerow management. And these could have the potential supporting reducing emissions in agriculture. And when we're looking into the potential of getting private finance to support these activities. And important as well is the whole element of co-benefits that European regulation stipulates that there must be at least one co-benefit with every unit or activity. You know, we're putting co-benefits, as somebody mentioned at a meeting during the week, we don't see them as co-benefits, we see them as core benefits. So, you know, we're putting them front and center. So elements such as biodiversity, water quality, soil health, could be air quality, will have an important role in this. So just general practices within agriculture, just to flag, that come in under the scope of carbon farming. So agroforestry is an important one, maintenance of soil organic carbon, livestock manure management. We'll look into the potential of going maybe broader scope than the European framework on that. Nutrient management on grasslands and croplands, peatland organic soil management. Again, this is very important given our high amount of organic soils in Ireland. Can we go for more extensive management? And payments for ecosystem services, kind of a general term. You know, again, bringing biodiversity into it, maybe there'll be potential to stack units. And in the likes of the forestry side, you know, that's a bit limited on where you can add to it, but there may be potential in extending rotation in forestry and bringing in more diversity and more ecosystem services. So we'll be looking at that too. So just something I just pulled from somewhere on agroforestry, which is an area we'd like to develop or see developed and supported. You know, so I think there's a target, there's a wish in the next few years that there might be maybe 2,000 hectares of agroforestry developed in Ireland. So there's, you know, that's something that the likes of the HOLOS technology, trying to measure above ground carbon would be very important. So methodology is important for that, because there's lots of benefits for the livestock. Again, water management, soil health, reducing erosion, shade, biodiversity. So we see good potential in this one. This is just something I pulled from, I think it ties into Teagasc's MAC curve, where some costings were done on certain interventions. So, for example, you can see hedgerows over on the right. The idea of planting hedgerows could generate quite a bit of CO2 sequestered, but with costings on the y-axis, quite expensive. So there are certain measures, interventions that could be taken that we've looked at and the costings of them. And it's seen that it would be quite expensive given practicality, say, for example, of hedgerows, to plant new hedgerows, but it may be more cost effective to just grow out and grow up the existing hedgerows, which would actually cost nil. Agroforestry is an area we want to develop, and again, to incentivize. So we have to get the policy conditions right, and that's our role in the department to facilitate that with. And then if people can come up with methodologies, something attractive can be there for farmers. Other interventions such as grassland management, cover crops. So they vary in cost. And so, you know, we have to make judgment call what to prioritize. So we did a public consultation last year from September, and we received 457 responses on the potential of developing a national framework for carbon farming. And most of the response, which was heartening, were from farmers, foresters, and a lot from ag advisors. And, you know, we received a lot of positive feedback from them on the concept of having this framework. And, you know, a lot of them were keen that something could be there for, again, to diversify the farm incomes. And there were broad agreement that we need carbon removals, greenhouse gas reductions, and also biodiversity measures included, whatever we develop. So some key questions that arose from the consultation, the big one is, how do we deal with ownership or, well, of credits? I mean, you know, in some ways it might be simple to answer, but that's a topical one with people. Who owns them? And also, I suppose more importantly, where do they go? Are they used for offsets for somebody else's emissions? Or a lot of people want them inset in the supply chain, and maybe the farmer or the producer to get a bigger share of it. How do these actions demonstrate additionality? I mean, this is a tough one. Additionality is where you can show that the action takes place over and above compliance or or, you know, if it's already business as usual to do a practice, it's not really additionality. So it can be difficult enough to prove it in certain areas, and we have to develop systems for that. And the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, is the principle of fairness. If people are already doing best practice already, there is a worry that they might be disadvantaged if a new scheme comes out and somebody who has maybe degraded their land might have more potential to enhance it. So we'll need to build safeguards, and I'm sure it's doable to look after those who've already been innovative and have good practices. And I suppose the big one is who's going to pay for this. You know, you can see from the schematic earlier, just to, you know, replenish hedgerows could cost over €1 billion. So all of this is, you know, there isn't enough money in CAP. So it's going to need probably public-private finance to make it happen. So our next steps, we have a flagship delivery team of different government departments and agencies working on designing the framework. And we're a bit late, but we should have our report from the public consultation from the end of last year out soon. And we're looking into issues like how we're going to handle the governance of it, funding. We're engaging with the Irish Strategic Investment Fund. And I suppose as part of what we're doing is to manage expectations that, you know, and also, I suppose, educate people and ourselves as to what we're talking about and the potential. You know, it may not suit everyone, and not to forget it's a voluntary aspect. And I suppose a key requirement of measurement, reporting, verification, that capability needs to be there. And that's why we need such technological platforms. You know, there's a bit of work in that. And again, our hope is that, you know, in general, to deliver this ecosystem services through the creation of this framework, we just want to move possibly a little bit sooner than the European framework or regulation in this. So that's it. Thanks.